Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola. Once again, my name's Paula Montgomery, and I'll be your service leader this morning. We are very glad that you're here. If we have some visitors, you are in for a very special treat. On certain Sundays, we have what we call Sunday Sweets, and for the membership, this is a fundraiser. But for visitors, it's a free treat. So be sure you claim yours. That's after the service, not right now. I have a fair number of announcements. I've already mentioned the Sunday Sweets, and we have a Sunday Sweets poet, Margaret McLaren, who writes up a poem for us. It's Sunday Sweets Day, so please stop by. Lots of cakes, cookies, brownies, and gluten-free banana bread for you to try. Have some here. Take some home. Whatever you choose, you can't go wrong. So after the service, we have coffee around the corner, and we also have the Sunday Sweets. And as a special treat, you can come back in here after you grab your sweets. Come back in here, and we'll have more discussion about the service. And what other announcements? We're having a family potluck next week, Sunday, October the 15th, after the service. All are invited to join us. We're going to need some help moving tables and chairs today after we get through with all the stuff that we're doing in here. We're going to need to move the tables around so we can eat together. If you're wondering what you need to bring, there is a list divided up alphabetically. And where is that list? Okay, it's out there somewhere. So. Yeah, it was in your email. I know I'm supposed to bring vegetables. On Sunday, boy, this is a busy month, October the 29th, UUCP will be hosting its Trick or Treasure Hunt. And boy, oh boy, do we need volunteers. It's fun. It's fun. People are needed to help set things up, work the event, clean up afterwards, and make baked treats for the cakewalk. A sign-up sheet will be available after the service, and we greatly appreciate any time or goodies that you're able to donate. Also, this event will be open to the public, so please feel free to spread the word to your friends and to your children's buddies. Invite them to come. And let's see, there's a sign-up sheet which is available after the service. It's by the entrance out here. All right, let's see what else. All right. You are all cordially invited to a fundraiser. Our pianist, Mike Kilmer, will be playing, and here are some of the details. I don't know if this is posted anywhere, but it is the 1-year birthday party, drinks, food, silent auction, poetry reading, Saturday from 4 to 6 on October 21st, here at this church. Now that sounds like fun too. Boy, this church knows how to have fun. Make sure I got all the announcements here. All right, all you people who gave me announcements, did I miss anything? Hugh?
The lunch bunch will be here on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Anyone who's interested, please see me after the service.
That's the lunch group. If you are interested, it's this coming Wednesday. See Hugh for more details. All right. All right, and at this point, I invite you to pay attention to the video of our 8th principles. Our opening words today are by Kathy Huff. Spirit of life, be present with us in this hour. Join us today as we gather in a wider search for truth and purpose. In this quest, may we greet one another with open hearts and minds. We're going to do our chalice lighting a little differently today. I'm going to ask you to read it with me because it says we. We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. Now, if you will, stand as you're willing and able, and we'll have our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. You may be seated while we have the choir come up for our opening hymn.
Every
Thank you. You may be seated now. As you know, this church is solely supported by its members and friends, and you are invited now to participate in the good work that we do within and beyond our walls by the offering. This time, we will dismiss the children to their classes, and we'll sing them out, and I won't give you a pitch, but go now in peace, go now in peace, may the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Now it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning. I actually don't have his bio in front of me, but I have known Henry for quite a while. He's been a friend of this church. He's a publisher, and he's a great teacher. So welcome, Henry.
Since I'm going to spend my time telling stories, you don't really need a bio. I have been accused of telling stories when I'm supposed to be giving facts, and herewith the evidence for the prosecution. But I want to start with a reading, and this is actually from a member of your congregation, Dolly Berthelot. Comes from this little book, Scars to Stars, and I have to read you the subtitle, Evolving Mystical Humanist UU, a memoir of head, heart, and soul. This is one of the books I publish, and I have 3 paragraphs from separate locations in the book, so let them each have their own weight. And then I cut a couple of paragraphs out, which we're going to use in the hour after, assuming we have time. First, she says, I strive to behave in ways that are positive for humans, and secondarily for other creatures and the earth and the cosmos. My focus is clearly human beings living in this life. That's quite enough of a challenge. Figuring out what some God wants or demands seems to be foolhardy and unproductive. Any rational God will want rational decision-making. Any compassionate God will want compassionate decision-making. Any God I would want would be both rational and compassionate. Like the humans I try to emulate, I fall short of my ideals like every other mortal, but I try like most of us. And then, a little further on, once when my son Destin was even younger, as we browsed in Montgomery Ward, he spotted a crucifix and asked, "What happened to that guy?" I squatted down to look him in the eye as I tried an impromptu explanation of that world-shaking history. Destin was rightfully appalled, as was I. Jesus had been treated abysmally, cruelly, unfairly. We felt for this Jesus, and we felt with him. We shared what I believe to be the most vital human trait, empathy. Destin did not need God to teach him that important trait or other significant positive human behaviors, which I believe grow out of empathy. And then finally, if the humanist aspect is seen as totally rational, logical, reasonable application of human behavior that sustains human life, for me, the mystical is the awesome aspect. Stunning moments that enrich life, make life especially worth living. It is the ineffable stuff of poetry and art and music and dance, of being profoundly awed by beauty, by nature, by natural miracles too often ignored, by coincidences and unexplained phenomena, and by life itself. Beyond awe, no, within awe is gratitude. In spite of problems, I find myself immensely grateful to be here, savoring the good and the beautiful. So thank you, Dolly, for that. I think it's probably not the most usual thing to have a reading from a member of the congregation, and also one that I publish, as opposed to selecting from another number of other places. But sometimes things express what you want to say a bit too well to be left out. And that goes together with several things, even that have happened this morning. I have to tell you that I've had several people will comment when I'm saying, I don't have time to prepare for this next sermon. And they say, well, you have no problem finding words whenever you want them. I say, yes, but the problem is, and the reason I have to prepare and have notes, is that I won't stop unless I have some notes that tell me what I'm not supposed to say. And one of the things about going a little bit impromptu is simply that you have things happen that illustrate the sermon right as you're going into it. And that started for me a week ago. Well, really, the first thing I realized was that I am not the person who should make words the subject of my sermon. That is just asking for trouble. And I'm really glad to see the clock back there, because then I don't have to pull out my watch all the time to see how much time I'm taking and know when I have to just shut up. But having realized that, I was asking during the Sunday school class that I teach, I was asking somebody to take this week because I wouldn't be there. And she said, fine, I'll go ahead and take that. What's the subject that's coming up? And since we're working from a free-form outline that I've been giving them, she's stuck with my subject. And she was willing to do that. But then here comes the question. What are you going to say to the Unitarians? And that is actually a fairly common question, and I've been asked here how much what I say here resembles what I say in a more Orthodox church. Now understand that my experience, I am almost always preaching to people who are more conservative than I am. I rarely have an opportunity to be talking to people who might be more progressive than I am. And I try to avoid too much labeling, but that's generally the fact. So, the person who asked that said, well, I know that that's off topic, so maybe you don't want to answer it today. Well, the subject was sharing grace. And I said, well, actually, it's right on topic, and let me tell you what I'm going to tell them. And I was able to go and outline what I had planned, and it fit right in. Now, you go from there to this morning, and I have the gray hymnal, which was given to me, I think, 20 years ago or something like that, so that I could pick songs when I was invited to preach. I don't know who thought I was going to preach here often enough that I needed my own hymnal, but I was given one. But I was given the gray one, not this blue one. And we had picked the song that you heard as a prelude, God of Many Names, was what I had selected as an opening hymn. And your pianist is ill, and I totally agree with the decision. You don't want to try to sing a hymn like that without a really good pianist. I have been the music leader of a church, and I understand the problem totally. Now, so I think Paula was a bit apologetic in the email. We're not going to be able to sing your hymn. We're going to have to sing this other one that may not fit in as well. But I don't know whether you want to call it God, coincidence, wonder, whatever. But oh my word, let me find this. When our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. Which seems to be what I was actually teaching about a week ago. And you go, how do all of these connections happen? I don't know. I don't know how all these things happen, but things happen that if your eyes are open, if your ears are open, can change you in a moment. I go back to the first time I preached in this congregation. Now, I used a sermon, and I found this in my notes. I talked to you at that time about finding your prophetic voice. And I wondered, how am I going to get people to understand what I mean by a prophetic voice? Because there's people out there saying, we're prophets, we're doing prophetic stuff, and what they're doing is predicting elections and telling us what God has in mind for every little decision or whatever, and so on and so forth. And what I meant by prophetic voice was, you have an influence, you have a view, you have a thing that this community needs, and you find your prophetic voice is how you're able to convey that through this community. I doubt that was close to 20 years ago, and I doubt that anybody here is going to tell me that your prophetic voice is less needed today than it was then. But this is one of those real important learning moments for me, well, several learning moments within that time, because I was sitting here worrying, how am I going to get this concept across in this congregation? At my home church, everybody was fussing over a more intellectual, theological faith versus a more experiential, spiritual faith. And I believe it was before the service, somebody was talking to me and said, well, we have somewhat of a divide here at UUCP between people who are into spiritual things, including New Age, Wicca, whatever, various spiritualities, and those who are more philosophical and intellectual. And he was explaining to me how this was somewhat different about UUCP, and I said, well, it sounds a lot like my home church. It sounds a lot like what I live with on a daily basis. Now, if I were to take many members of that church and bring them together with you, and you started to try to converse about that, terminology would hang everybody up, because you're not using the same words. For example, when I say New Age, Wicca, let's just go, I sometimes get interactive. Show of hands, for how many of you are those words negative? Are they negative for anybody in this room? Wicca and New Age. Okay? So you get the feel there. Now, if I use those in an Orthodox Christian church, my next 15, 20 minutes are dealing with the results of my using the words. And that simply is an illustration of where you have very similar things going on. The reality, the experience that's happening, what people are living is similar, but their words get into the way of being able to realize that their experiences are similar. A friend of mine and one of my authors as well is he's now professor emeritus at Walla Walla University, where I got my undergraduate degree. I visited their congregation at the university, which is somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 people in a congregation. And I'm sitting there in the church, and the postlude starts. And I'm basically glued to my chair. I mean, I have rarely heard the kind of organ playing and the quality of it that I heard. And I thought, people are going to think I'm dumb sitting here blocking all the road. And I looked around, nobody was leaving the church. They sat there through the entire postlude, just glued in place as this organist played. And I shared with my friend about that, and he says, I had a conversation with him, and he told me that he can't find anybody who experiences spiritually what he experiences at the pipe organ. And he said he feels extremely isolated in his spiritual experience. My friend told him, you need to go, and I forget what day it was, but once a week, there is a student group that are into heavy metal rock, and they meet and share their music. And he says, if you go there, you're going to find people who are experiencing what you're experiencing. Completely different background, but it's a shared experience. And somebody needs to tell me what time on that clock I need to stop so that I don't tell more stories than I'm supposed to. Because I just told 3 stories that weren't in my notes. 9:55? Okay, that's excellent. I'll manage to pull it off. I will add, since it's 9:55, I'll add one very short story. I'm famed for having once preached for 2.5 hours. And the funny thing about this, I was 21 at the time, and I was a guest. This was overseas, where they had me as a teenager in the youth group. This was in Guyana in South America. And then I came back to visit when I was a senior in college. And they wanted me to preach. This was on a Wednesday night. And we had the clock right there in the back. And I'm talking and this and that and the other, as I will. And I look up at the clock and I go, and I've said to myself, if that clock is right, I have been talking for 1.5 hours. And I didn't even know it. And I looked down, the head elder of the church is sitting in the front row, and I said, I'm looking at the clock. Have I actually been talking for 1.5 hours? And the man looked up at me, and he lied right in church and said, no, that clock is broken. Keep going. That was another interesting coincidence, because I was talking about God's care for you, and I got a letter probably a month afterward. There was race rioting in that community for the next several weeks after that, and they said they lived on the sermon. And I had no idea whatsoever. And again, you see you can call it a coincidence, you can do whatever. It's a wonderful universe, folks. I have no idea, because I can guarantee you I had no knowledge of any of that. And so let's get into, I want to bring up a point of terminology, and I'm going to use a couple of illustrations. I'm going to leave some out. We can put them into the half hour. And the first one has to do with the term biblical inerrancy. Now, I asked you about Wicca and New Age. For how many people is biblical inerrancy a positive term? Okay. See, I love asking questions when I really know the answer it's going to be. And you probably know, because I think the last time I was here, I specifically talked about biblical inerrancy, and it's one of the things I very definitely don't believe. Well, let's go back to the very early days of the internet. Now, understand, I have been involved in online communication since before there was an internet, when we had our computers waking up in the middle of the night and calling each other when the long distance rates were low. Now people don't remember what long distance rates are, but that was how, and we could get an email from New York City to Los Angeles in only 5 days. I mean, it was really quite amazing what we could do with technology. But in the early days, just as the internet was getting started, I was involved in some online discussion. It was one of these small ponds where you get to be a big fish. And everybody knew that I strongly do not affirm, is that a good phrase? Biblical inerrancy. And we had another person on there who strongly affirmed biblical inerrancy. And the key thing here was that both of us read biblical Hebrew. And so the other folks wanted a debate, because they figured we were the power opponents who would let everybody know what's going on. And the debate that was laid out for us was this: did the invasion of Canaan by the Israelites following the Exodus, as described in the biblical book of Joshua, actually occur? Now, please hear the other coincidence. I planned this illustration and told this very illustration to my Sunday school class last week before the latest war broke out. But you have to think of the history in the Middle East. I've studied the history of wars 4,000 to 5,000 years ago in the Middle East. This has been going on for a long time, and it is very sad, and we should be both thinking and praying, but also acting about it. But the question here was strictly historical, and for many people it was a religious result, because the question was, could you trust the Bible? And since, of course, I did not affirm biblical inerrancy, they had certain expectations of me, and they had certain expectations of the other guy, and the plan was, we'll both put an essay online simultaneously. We won't read the other essay. And so everybody will get just our raw answer to the question as the opening to the debate. And so we posted our responses, and people started to read them, and I looked at mine. Now, what I had maintained was this: the vast majority of the cities that are said to have been destroyed in the invasion have no indication archaeologically of any destruction at that time period. Now, there's a variation in the time period, but you can go ahead and change it, and there still isn't any evidence of the destruction. Then there's the rather interesting literary evidence that the biblical book of Joshua is followed by the biblical book of Judges, which has all the same places get invaded with a different story. So you have a completely different result. Suddenly places, we wiped everybody out from here to there and not a single person was left alive, and then we were fighting them a couple chapters down the road. And so this was basically my point. This didn't happen. What did happen, it's a whole other story, but this didn't happen. So we go read the other guys. And oddly enough, he says, well, really by the evidence, no, this stuff didn't happen. He cited almost all the same sources. We could have cribbed each other's notes as far as our write-up of the history. So now what do? Your great inerrancy debate has gone thud, because we both said exactly the same thing. So of course, and you'll recognize this in the way the internet works now, his next step was to accuse me of lying. But I really did believe in inerrancy, and everybody goes and says, huh? And then somebody accuses him of lying, because how can you say that this didn't happen, and it says it happened, and therefore, obviously you've got something wrong. Well, let me get back. Where did I put I have a nifty page of notes here somewhere. Well, I don't have, there it is. There's a nice concept in computer science called namespaces, and we need it in reality. Namespace is where all the various names mean a certain thing in a certain namespace. And so for a theologian, biblical inerrancy is defined by a fairly long doctrine. It's the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy, and it has a number of points. When talking to a Christian audience, at this point I have to specify the inerrancy which I reject is the inerrancy of the Chicago Statement, because I will be accused of never having read it, which I have in fact done. Here's a point from it. It says, "We affirm that Scripture, having been given by divine inspiration, is infallible, so that far from misleading us, it is true and reliable." Now listen to this line, "in all the matters it addresses." Now, in all the matters it addresses in theological terms becomes the hole through which you drive any number of trucks that you want. It's very often cited as the Bible is true and reliable in everything it intends to affirm, which is a slightly different and even more open-ended reading. So what my opponent was telling me was I was theologically ignorant, hadn't read the definition of biblical inerrancy, and therefore he was just fine. Here was his assertion. Joshua, by literary genre, is a founding legend. Founding legends are not supposed to be true, therefore I don't have to affirm that the book of Joshua is true. And in turn, I was not supposed to claim that I was not affirming inerrancy in claiming again that the book was not true. Now this goes back to some rather important background points. For him, biblical inerrancy was not so much about biblical inerrancy. It was his way of saying, I think the Bible is important and fundamental, and it's something that I believe in. He had a fairly secular education and had felt a fight against his religious affirmations. To him, leaving that off was to give in to the other side. I have a very different experience. I have a master's degree. It's a non-thesis master's degree, but I wrote a thesis. The way that happened was that one of the professors who would have had to sign off on it rejected it, not because my scholarship was bad, but because I was doing bad things. That he saw that the direction that I was going in this was contrary to his theology. To me, I believe in biblical inerrancy. When somebody says that, that means to me, you're coming after my scholarship based on your theological presuppositions. To us, you can apply any number of technical definitions to that, but emotionally, the word is bound to mean something different to the two of us. I want to tell just really briefly, and I may run like a minute across, I want to conclude, and I'll bring everything else into the hour after if you want, because I had to leave a number of things out as I added. But this business of language is not just between religions and tradition streams. Go back to the theological, the rational, logical approach versus the spiritual approach that we talked about. That is often between people of very similar understanding otherwise. And I had this illustrated very forcefully to me through a young man, and to give the background, we lost our son James at 17 from cancer. That's been a lot of years ago. No, it doesn't fade, I'm sorry to tell you. It doesn't. But James had some friends, two of which got married. And then she got pregnant, and they found out it was going to be a boy, and they invited my wife Jody and I out to dinner. And the purpose of the dinner, besides feeding us, was to ask us, do you mind if we name our son after yours? And so in honor of our James, their son was named James. Now, James, over the years, it turned out, is on the spectrum. I can't really discuss where, but to me, I'll put it simply, James is brilliant. He's extraordinary. He's exceptional. And the joy for me is that very often I can hold conversations with James that nobody else in the room understands. Because mechanical things, electrical things, anything that moves, makes noise, does that sort of, he understands. Now, his mother came to me, and his mother is also a dear friend, and she is driven by poetry and art and literature. And if a device operates with moving parts, that is of no interest to her whatsoever. None at all. And she came to me, she talks to me regularly. My faith tells me that pride is a sin, but I'm proud of the fact that people will bring questions to me that they're afraid to bring anywhere else. She came to me and she said, here's my problem. I have these spiritual experiences, my spirituality, and I can't communicate them with my son because he is so different. He doesn't think in ways that I think at all. And she used the phrase that she knows, and probably did it intentionally, sets me off, when she said that maybe he just wasn't spiritual. Well, I dislike that line. I dislike that, just like when you say maybe somebody is stupid. Please don't. But also don't call me smart if you think I am, because we all have our own talents and we have our own abilities, and it's not don't package them. So I said, how do you know that he's not spiritual? I said, his spirituality is unlikely to be expressed in your terms. That is not the way he thinks. Now, it's the way I think. I find it just very easy to talk to him. As a matter of fact, I get flashbacks thinking, what did my parents go through when I'm working with him? Because he does things that I did when I was his age. And so for the mother, I wrote this poem, and I'm going to close with it and a point of its dedication. When God said, "Let there be light," what was it like? An explosion of sound like rolling thunder, clashing cymbals, booming drums, or a wildly cheering crowd? Or maybe it was glorious music, an engaging ballad, an organ performance, a symphony, a marching band, perhaps an explosion of rock and roll. Perhaps it was a sweet solo, a cappella words with power, a soprano reaching star-high notes, a bass rattling the foundations, a rich contralto, or a rapper's energy and rhythm. Or maybe the word had no sound, an explosion of light and color, beauty illumined by soundless word, dreams of mysterious symbols, sculptures of thought and design, even substantial structures of emotions. Even that might be insufficient, so a blueprint, stretching infinitely, connections intricate and planned, mechanisms carrying unresisted power, measurements of incomprehensible precision, a song, a picture, a word, an action, divine, or just God's word, and there was. I put that in a book that I wrote, and I dedicated the book to James, and the dedication reads, to James, maybe it's you. And I signed the book, and I presented it to him. Now, you have to understand, James doesn't care about the book. James doesn't care about the poem. That was written for his mother. James did care about the fact that I had taken the time to sign a book and give it to him. He was happy with that. And after I handed him that copy of the book, there was just a moment, and then he grabbed my arm. He was 10 years old at the time. "Papa Henry," he said, "I made a fire alarm. And he dragged me across the room to where there was a collection of scavenged parts wired together. He had a heat sensor and everything, and he heated up his heat sensor, and his alarm went off with a sound that would repel armies. And I looked at him and at those parts, and I thought for a moment, between the shining eyes of a 10-year-old and then that collection of parts, that I saw God.
Wow. Our closing hymn is this little light of mine, page 118 in our gray hymnal, and I'll give the choir a minute to get up here.
Stand if you're willing and able.
Don't forget Sunday Sweets, and come back in here and we will have some more discussion. The closing words today: we have a calling in this world. We're called to honor diversity, to respect differences with dignity, and to challenge those who would forbid it. We are people of a wide path. Let us be wide in affection and go our way in peace. Thank you.